Longevity is the latest health and wellness buzzword that is pretty much like bleeding into the world of skincare. But now that links to Jeffrey Epstein have destroyed the reputation of one of longevity's biggest names, will we finally realize it's all just become another scam? Longevity is everywhere nowadays. It's talked about on podcasts, it's on your Instagram feed, in the ads on YouTube. Experts are rebranding themselves as longevity experts. Everyone is talking about it, and most of them are selling you something, of course. Whether it's pills, special protocols, or biohacks that promise to rewind your biological clock. So how did we get here? Where did this come from? Because it does feel like it appeared from nowhere. And today I want to talk about how one man in particular helped longevity go from a niche term used in academic papers and health studies to a trend that spread from biotech and pharmaceutical research circles into all sorts of industries, including skincare. As well as how in just a few short years it went from being about actual science to being about misleading data, quick fixes, and too many miracle supplements. But before I get too deep into it, in case you don't know, let's just give a quick explanation about longevity. It kind of is what it says on the tin, right? When people talk about longevity, they usually mean living longer, but more importantly, living well for longer. It's less about chasing like a huge lifespan number, you know, people aren't wanting to live till like 150, but it's more about extending your healthy years, keeping your body and mind functioning well as you age, which sounds great. In health, that can mean things like exercise, nutrition, stress management, preventing disease, and of course, the sheer amount of supplements and biohacking that have become popular. In skincare, in health and beauty, longevity has become a marketing way of talking about supporting skin health over time, helping maintain barrier function, hydration, resilience, protecting against things like UV damage and inflammation, and of course, delaying the signs of aging. Now, the idea itself isn't new, but the word longevity is definitely having a very, I guess you could say, trendy rebrand right now. We need to talk about Peter Attia. Now, Peter Attia didn't invent the idea of longevity, but he did change who paid attention to it. Before Attia, the conversation around longevity was often split into two different extremes, let's say. One side, you had dense academic research and scientific papers. It was detailed, restrained, and based on facts, but also largely inaccessible to the general public. The other extreme was the growing world of wellness influencers and anti-aging gurus making bold, often unsubstantiated claims, usually based on very poorly misunderstood or even deliberately misleading interpretations of the available data and research. The world of longevity at the time was either too complex for the average person to understand, or it was a niche topic talked about by the wellness influencers with no credentials that were taken far less seriously back then. But when Peter Attia began making a name for himself, he managed to step into that gap between these two extremes of the longevity world. He was a trained medical doctor who could apparently interpret the science and data accurately, whilst explaining it in a way that was easier to understand for the general public. So he sat here kind of thing. And to many, he didn't seem as out there as most other wellness influencers. The claims he made seemed a bit more grounded and kind of less over the top. He first started with a blog he ran called The Eating Academy, but he only really started gaining some attention in 2013 after he gave a widely viewed TED Med talk, back when TED Talks were still popular and they only had real experts on. At that point, it was mostly scientists, doctors, and endurance athletes who were really interested in what he had to say. Quick note, sorry. I hugged my dogs before this and I sprayed some perfume in my eye by accident, so if my eye twitches occasionally, ignore it. Anyway, but he then went on a string of high-profile podcasts over the next few years, like The Tim Ferriss Show, Huberman Lab, and The Joe Rogan Experience, to name a few. These podcast appearances helped raise his profile massively, with many of the bigger podcasts he was on getting millions and millions of views. Of course, he became particularly popular in the bro science circles in those early days, the kind of people who follow Joe Rogan and who are always talking about things like optimization, performance, and biohacking. And a lot of these wellness influencers kind of never break out of this community. The way they talk might appeal to gym bros, but not anyone else. Peter Attia was different though. The seemingly more nuanced, more scientific way he discussed longevity and health pretty much appealed to a much wider audience. I guess it had some kind of like credibility behind it, you know? supposedly. Launching his own podcast, The Drive, helped expand his audience outside of the gym bros who loved him and the scientists and doctors who often disagreed with him. On his podcast, he'd go into pretty detailed explanations about things like metabolism, fasting, aging, and much more in a way that many felt was approachable while still being rigorous and grounded. And unlike a lot of the wellness influencers at the time, he wasn't making too many obviously ridiculous claims or like jumping on the bandwagon of every new longevity or biohacking trend that came along. He was also open to changing his mind in those early years if enough evidence came out that disproved something that he'd previously believed. And this isn't something that could be said for most wellness influencers. This all helped set him apart from the majority of wellness influencers, but it wasn't until he released his book Outlive: The Science and Art of Longevity that he really became somewhat of a household name. The book was released in 2023, and it was basically Attia's blueprint for living longer and staying healthier for longer, which he calls extend your health span, not just your lifespan. It went on to be hugely successful, becoming a New York Times bestseller for over 100 weeks and selling an estimated 2 to 3 million copies worldwide. This gave Attia a level of recognition and credibility that made him arguably the biggest name in the world of longevity. For many, it was their first real exposure to the idea of longevity in the context of health anyway, and for others who had heard people talk about longevity and had dismissed them as snake oil salesmen, this was the first time they heard it talked about in a more grounded and scientific way. Now, Peter Attia didn't single-handedly make longevity mainstream, but he definitely played such a big role, arguably bigger than any other single person. For many, his word is gospel. His word is the only source they need in order to believe something. But that level of influence has its downsides, because if people believed everything he said just because they liked and trusted him, then what happens when his reputation is in tatters? The absolute destruction of Peter Attia's public image began just a few weeks after he arguably reached the pinnacle of his career. The popularity of his book and the way it raised his profile had made Attia so well known that he was given a role as a CBS News contributor on January 28, 2026. This was the pinnacle for Attia. He'd now be able to spread his health and wellness beliefs on national TV, making longevity an even more widely known concept, whilst further establishing himself as the expert on it. But just 2 days after his role was announced, everything came crashing down in such a huge way. On January the 30th, 2026, millions of documents from the Epstein files were released to the public, and Peter Attia was in a lot of them. A lot. Documents showed that he'd exchanged around 600 emails with Epstein over several years between 2015 and 2019, and although there isn't any clear evidence that Peter Attia was involved in anything illegal with Epstein, the emails between them are often highly questionable, just gross, or even downright bizarre. In perhaps the most damning email, he said, "You know the biggest problem with becoming friends with you? The life you lead is so outrageous, and yet I can't tell a soul." He sent that after Epstein sent him a photo, which has since been redacted, but apparently wasn't when the files first came out, that allegedly showed Epstein with a group of young women. In another email to Epstein, he said, "Pussy is indeed low carb, still awaiting results on gluten content though." Oh my god, I hated reading that, that's horrible. In a lot of the emails, Attia comes across like someone obsessed with Epstein, who was trying to flatter and impress him whenever he could. Like when a meeting with Epstein got cancelled, he replied to Epstein's assistant saying, "I go into JE withdrawal when I don't see him." Attia obviously tried to make excuses for his relationship with Epstein, and he posted a statement on X addressing the links. I won't read out the whole thing here because it's very, very long, and you can still go find it on X if you want to read it for yourself, but I do just want to mention a few of the things he said that people have taken issue with, because a lot of people have said that Attia's statement doesn't hold up very well. They brought up things like him saying that he's never been to Epstein's ranch or the island, which might be true. There isn't any evidence that he did, but there are emails that suggest that he was very keen to do so. He just never got the chance. People have also pointed out that even if he hadn't been to the ranch or on his island. He had been to Epstein's home in Manhattan 7 or 8 times, as Attia himself admits, and he'd even stayed in one of Epstein's apartments in New York. He also tried to excuse the fact that he chose to be friends with Epstein in the first place despite his criminal record because he was naive. He said, "Shortly after we met, I asked him directly about his 2008 conviction. He characterized it as a prostitution-related charges. In 2018, I came to learn this was grossly minimized. More on this below. I was incredibly naive to believe him." Okay, but of course nobody was buying this explanation. Attia's friendship with Epstein started in 2014, well after Jeffrey Epstein had become a registered sex offender after being convicted of child prostitution. For most who read Attia's statement, the idea that he'd just take the word of a convicted sex offender just wasn't going to cut it, obviously. They also pointed out that he continued communication with Epstein in a friendly manner even after the new allegations against him came out in 2018. In his statement, Attia says that after seeing the Miami Herald's investigative article, on Epstein's crimes in November of 2018, he says, "I was repulsed by what I learned, nauseated. It marked a clear and irreversible line between what I knew before and what I understood afterwards." But critics said that the emails show a different story. Instead of showing outrage or cutting off ties with Epstein, he sent an email less than a week later saying, "What is fallout from recent story?" That doesn't sound to most people like a man who's repulsed or nauseated by their friend's crimes, right? You don't contact them. I won't go into the emails between Attia and Epstein any further because it's not the main focus of this video, but there is a lot more there to talk about, and there are plenty of other videos you can find that go into detail about that. But despite Attia's claims that he'd done nothing wrong and CBS at first refusing to fire him for his links to Epstein, Attia did eventually resign due to the controversy on February 23rd of 2026, with a spokesperson for him saying that he left to ensure his involvement didn't become a distraction from the important work being done at CBS. Now, some of you might be thinking that just because Peter Attia is linked to Epstein, that doesn't mean the science behind what he was saying is suddenly wrong. And I agree. The thing is though, plenty of scientists and doctors had actually been calling out some of Attia's claims for years. But for the most part, nobody had listened to them because Peter Attia was the trusted face of longevity. He had become a celebrity. But the Epstein links, of course, changed all that. Now that his reputation was destroyed, suddenly people were willing to listen. Several of Attia's claims about health and longevity have been questioned by experts over the years, including 2 of the claims he makes the most often, that VO2 max is the strongest predictor of lifespan, and that improving it will improve longevity, and that people should start using statins earlier in their life, even in their 20s, to reduce cholesterol levels over your lifetime, because again, he thinks it will improve longevity. I won't go into the science of it all too much, as again, that's not the point of this video and it's confusing, but well-respected doctors and scientists have explained why these claims aren't entirely accurate, or in some cases aren't accurate at all. They've called Attia out for using incomplete and often very minimal evidence to support his claims, ignoring the possibility that overuse of certain drugs might be more harmful than the issue they treat, and forgetting that correlation does not mean causation, as well as accusing him of misrepresenting data, altering graphs, and sometimes just photoshopping graphs out entirely from images if that specific one doesn't support his claims. Sounds like a typical longevity biohacking wellness bro, to be honest with you. Some have even pointed out that although Peter Attia does have a medical degree, he never actually finished his residency program and therefore isn't a board certified specialist. While this isn't an issue for private practice, which is what Attia does, it would prevent him from treating patients at most hospitals, as it would be considered the bare minimum to be a qualified physician. But perhaps what has led some to question Attia's credibility the most comes down to his lawsuit with Aura Ring. In July of 2023, Attia sued the brand for breach of contract, claiming that they had failed to follow through with stock options they had promised him in return for help developing, testing, marketing, and promoting their health tracking ring. Stock options that would now apparently be worth between $25 $5 and $31 million. An unexpected side effect of this lawsuit, though, was that it led people to see behind the scenes of these kind of deals. And many weren't happy that Attia had so much involvement with Aura, which he regularly promoted through his podcast, social media, and other media appearances. One of the main issues people had was that he apparently influenced medical studies related to what Aura's products can actually do, including helping get Aura included in studies in order to help market the product. Many felt like this was a clear corruption of the scientific process, and I agree, it is. Another issue was that many didn't feel that Attia was open enough about the level of his involvement with the brand, or that he would soon own equity in the company. Many felt like saying he was an advisor was too vague, and some even claimed that he often didn't mention that he was linked to the company in any way whatsoever. He even says that his podcast has no ads on it. This is like the equivalent of an influencer not disclosing affiliate links, right? This, according to many, is also a common occurrence with Attia's brand deals, calling out similar issues with the way he's promoted other brands that he happened to be an investor in or was an advertiser for, like AG1 Dexcom, Maui Nui, and many, many more. Apparently he gets around having to disclose his involvement with these brands by telling people there's a link on his website that lists all of his conflicts of interest. Though how many people actually leave the podcast to then go check out the website is debatable. That's also not how you properly disclose an advert by law. Unsurprisingly, all of this has led to many to start calling a lot of what Attia promoted a scam. While I don't know if that's true for all the ideas and products he promoted, I can't blame anyone for thinking that. I certainly don't trust him. He was supposed to be the one person who could actually be trusted, the one that was nuanced and avoided jumping on trends, who focus on science rather than what sounded impressive like all the influencers do. And with the longevity space already starting to feel more and more scammy to a lot of consumers, Attia's fall from grace has made it seem so much worse. To be fair, this isn't just about Peter Attia. His recent issues may have damaged people's perception of longevity more than most, but he isn't the only one to blame. So how did we get here? How did longevity become just another buzzword used to trick people when it could have been so much more? Well, the answer is, as usual, money. Before 2010, longevity was almost entirely an academic interest. Researchers focused on the biology of aging, on lifespan studies, and the underlying mechanisms of how humans deteriorate over time. The work was very slow, methodical, and largely invisible to the general public, actually. There were no popular products built around it and no personal brands attached to it. It just existed as a scientific field of study. But that began to change in the early 2010s. It was around this time that significant amounts of money started flowing into longevity research. Biotech brands like Calico Life Sciences, Human Longevity Inc., and Unity Biotechnology were founded in the early 2010s, often receiving early investments in the hundreds of millions or even billions of dollars, signaling that longevity was becoming something people thought they could make money from. A lot of money from. High-profile investors like Peter Thiel and Jeff Bezos also began backing anti-aging and longevity research, bringing even more attention to the space. Almost overnight, longevity became associated with some of the wealthiest people in the world, with high-tech innovation, and suddenly it was seen as something like aspirational. One moment, it was an almost unheard of concept. The next, it was the new trend among those obsessed with optimization. By the mid to late 2010s, longevity has started to move even more into mainstream culture, becoming particularly popular in the world of biohacking. I fucking hate that word. Where people were already experimenting with ways to optimize their bodies and minds, usually by doing whatever Joe Rogan told them to do. And this helped the concept spread even further, as there was a wide network of podcasts, YouTube channels, blogs, and other online communities that discuss these kind of topics longevity was linked to. The problem was, as the ideas longevity was promoting spread even further and further from the scientific study and research it was built on, the ideas and the data started to get twisted and misinterpreted. It was now being interpreted by wellness or biohacking influencers who often didn't have any background in science or medicine. I always say this, like, a lot of influencers think they can do their own research by finding a medical journey, a study, and reading that conclusion, unless you are trained in the science that that study is talking about or is relevant to. So you can skim the study yourself, raise red flags in your head or interpret it yourself in an educated way, just reading the conclusion doesn't tell you shit. So instead of carefully checked conclusions, you got personal theories and made up protocols that claim to be based on the science, but weren't really. The actual science behind longevity was often simplified to make it easier for listeners to understand, the evidence was overblown to sound more compelling, or the data was taken out of context to support a claim that just wasn't true. By this point, longevity had become a full-scale industry. It wasn't just research or vague ideas to discuss, it was something that could be packaged and sold. From private clinics and personalized optimization programs to training protocols and a whole variety of diagnostic tests, there were so many things people could now charge you money for. And all of it was framed using the language of science and precision, regardless of whether it was actually true or not. If getting sales means saying something could add 10 years to your life or stop you from getting heart disease, then someone will twist the data so they can justify saying it. It doesn't matter to them if it's not actually the truth. They just want that sale, that affiliate money. I'm not saying everything to do with longevity is a scam, but a lot of the programs or products being offered rely on incomplete evidence, early stage research, or correlations that are treated as if they're definitive conclusions, when they aren't. They're just not. One of the best examples of this was Ambrosia, which was a controversial biotech startup that used plasma transfusions from young donors as anti-aging therapy. I'm pretty sure that's what Brian Johnson guy was doing, the billionaire, the guy who looks like a mannequin and is weirdly obsessed with his son because he wants to stay young and actually doesn't look any younger. He just looks like he's had a good haircut and a good skincare routine. Anyway, the problem is that plasma transfusions are an unproven treatment, with no proven clinical benefits. The company is unsurprisingly now out of business. In the last 5 or 6 years, the number of people talking about longevity online has exploded. And so is the number of people misrepresenting the data, misinterpreting the data, I should say, making misleading claims, and using vague scientific language to give their products credibility. The amount of influencers I know who describe themselves as a biohacker is crazy. It's everywhere now, and it's just spreading into more and more industries. There's epigenetic testing to determine your biological age. I guess it's like, what's your body's real age kind of thing. Medtech spas offering things like IV therapy and hyperbaric oxygen to increase longevity. Supplements that claim to support cellular health and metabolic function. Personalized diet plans that supposedly mimic fasting and prevent chronic diseases. And of course, skincare products that promise to boost skin cellular longevity or use biotech ingredients to reverse aging. Outside of the questionable misinterpretation of the actual science and data behind bold longevity claims, one of the main issues with the term these days is that there is no fixed definition of what it means, and at least not in the way it's used to sell products. And there's no consistency in how it's used across industries. Like, are we talking about how long you'll live? How long you'll stay healthy for, preventing diseases, general well-being, or in the case of skincare, are we talking about slowing visible signs of aging, strengthening the skin barrier, reducing inflammation? Like, what does your product do? Does it improve cell turnover and renewal, or one of the many other ways it's used in skincare? Like, what's your product gonna do? It's too vague. The reality is longevity is just used as a way to signal credibility to customers, to imply scientific backing, and to justify making products or services more expensive. It's a term that doesn't need to be clearly supported with evidence. It just has to sound convincing. It's meant to convey authority and trust without having to actually prove anything as well. Basically, in the skincare world, at least, it's the new clean or natural. Slowly, more and more consumers have been realizing that those words don't actually mean anything, at least not in the way they're using it in the beauty industry. So companies need a new word to trick consumers, and this time it's longevity. It's just another marketing buzzword these days, and a lot of brands are actually jumping on the bandwagon. A lot I think you're actually going to be surprised by, maybe some not so surprised by. Paula's Choice, their cellular youth longevity serum, which claims to be an unparalleled longevity serum that visibly reverses the look of skin age, restoring firmness, smoothness, and radiance for a younger look longer. The ingredients are pretty basic though, and it kind of just feels like they've just chucked in the word longevity on a normal moisturizing serum. Tatcha, have released a longevity collection, which claims to restore skin's youthful look and delay visible signs of aging. The website says that it's inspired by the science of longevity and that the collection is powered by their Okinawa cell sensic complex. I don't know. That consists of shikawaza lime, noni juice, and shell ginger. Aramore is a newer brand that's built its entire identity around longevity. Their skincare line is focused on NAD, which is a molecule that's responsible for cellular regeneration, not necessarily when applied topically. On their website, they say that skincare only skims the surface. Skin longevity goes deeper. They also say that the brand is a revolutionary skincare line based on significant recent discoveries in longevity science. And they claim that their team of leading scientists developed a revolutionary NAD complex that can penetrate the skin barrier using NAD precursors, sorry. For this, you can expect to pay $110 for 50 ml of their cell energizing treatment, $124 for 30 ml of their retinol peptide boosting serum, or $70 for their NAD supplements that claim to renew skin from the inside out. I can see why a lot of consumers feel like the majority of skin longevity products are just fairly basic products that are overpriced. They've just been rebranded to sound more innovative and exciting, but in reality, the same main ingredients that you find in most skincare products are the ones still doing all the work. So if you're struggling to see what's actually different about longevity skincare, I don't blame you. Like, one explanation I've seen a lot from brands is that it's all about preventing skin issues rather than treating them after they occur. But that doesn't sound innovative to me. That's K-beauty. That's the K-beauty approach. Brands are now trying to tell us that using sunscreen regularly is skin longevity, because it helps prevent damage happening in the first place. Whereas using something like retinol to treat hyperpigmentation isn't longevity, because it's waiting for damage to happen and then treating it. I mean, sure, but we've been talking about regular sunscreen use for decades. And we've been promoting prevention over treatment for years. So why is it suddenly longevity now? See what I mean? It's just rebranding everything from vitamin C, vitamin E, and retinoids, peptides, niacinamide, green tea extract are being described as ingredients that support skincare longevity nowadays. And they aren't being used any differently at all. They're just being described differently. And often you're paying more because of the word, simply because longevity is on the bottle. Another issue with the rise of longevity in skincare is that brands have started changing the kinds of promises they make with their products. We're used to brands claiming that they reduce wrinkles, improve hydration, or smooth texture. Those claims, whilst not perfect, can at least be tested, you know? You can see if the products are doing what they claim to do. But now the claims brands are making are much more abstract and difficult to assess. How do you tell if a product that claims to support longevity, improve cellular function, or protect long-term skin health is actually doing those things? Like, you can't see them, and those claims sound more impressive, more scientific, but they're so much harder to verify and see. At the end of the day, there's nothing fundamentally new about most longevity skincare. Protecting your skin from UV damage, supporting the skin barrier, maintaining hydration, using ingredients that encourage cell turnover. These are all ideas that have been around for ages and should be part of your weekly routine. Antioxidant, exfoliation, protection, hydration, like, everyone's doing that. This is the thing, like, there's always these new skincare discoveries, but retinoids at the end of the day and sunscreen, I hate to say it because I love an extensive routine and new and exciting ingredients and gimmicky ones that might have some interest in them, right? They might be too early, but there might be more information on them coming soon. I love all that. But as far as like finding something new, the next big thing, we found it. Retinoids. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's like we don't really have to dig that deep when it comes to skincare and what it can do for our skin. There are a lot of questionable claims being made around longevity and a lot of questionable products or services being offered too. So just remember, I know you're all so clever, but just because something sounds scientific doesn't mean it is. There is real research happening in some areas of longevity and real scientific progress being made. But right now, the term is mostly just being used as branding to make you think something is scientific, especially when it comes to skincare. A lot of people are already wary when they see the term longevity thrown around, and with major names in the space like Peter Attia losing their credibility in a very public way, maybe the idea of longevity will start to lose its relevance soon. Maybe it won't take over the skincare industry like natural or clean beauty once did, but I'm not massively confident. What do you think though? Have you tried any of these like longevity skincare products that have been released recently? Do you think they're actually innovative, or is it just another way to make everyone pay money for basically the same thing, just with a different name? What do you think?